So, Rush House. Now, I just did a review of The Looking Glass Wall by John le Carré, and I thought it would be good to do a comparison, because even though I said I love Looking Glass Wall, I thought it was peak cynicism, actually, Rush House is my fundamental favourite le Carré book, and one that I think addresses all of the issues that were found within Looking Glass Wall. So I thought it would be a good one to do. Now, to give a little preview, because I feel like my own attention span is fucked, so I wouldn't even be able to watch this video myself. So a little preview. Rush House has a disillusioned publisher, a Brit drinking in Portugal, a Russian defector that calls himself Gotha, people pissing on graves, they got a little bit of that, and missile secrets. So there you go, there's the whole overview. Hopefully that's enough. Now, the actual story. Rush House follows Barley Blair, who is, as I said, a disillusioned British publisher who becomes entangled in espionage, as we will see. He becomes so when a manuscript which involves top secret Soviet military information, the contents of which aren't clear at first, is smuggled out of the USSR. The manuscript is smuggled out through a woman named Katya. She hands it to an associate of Mr. Barley Blair, a man called Nicky Landau. After this, the manuscript makes its way to British intelligence. They realise its importance, and to get more access, they bring in Barley Blair to recruit the source. The source, who they have no idea. It's an anonymous document given to a friend meant to be for Barley Blair that accidentally ends up in the hands of MI6. So, Barley is recruited by MI6 and CIA, reluctantly you have to say, to investigate the authenticity of Gotha. As he delves deeper into the mystery and eventually returns to Russia, Barley becomes personally invested, especially in Katya, the woman that delivered the original manuscript. All of this, and what eventually develops into a sort of love for Katya, causes him to question the morality of intelligence work that he reluctantly but still did agree to in the beginning. Ultimately, Barley risks everything, navigating deception, treachery on all sides, and most of all, the fundamental to all of these stories, he has to navigate betrayal. He does all of this in a bid to protect Katya and act according to his conscience. That's spoiler-free. The spoiler version is, he betrays his own country in the end. After Gotha is confirmed as a real person, but is captured, in order to save Katya, he hands over the information of British spies in Russia and the whole operation to protect this woman that he's just met and now loves. Crazy. The non-spoiler version is much more interesting, but I feel like I should have. It's nice to give a warning so I don't spoil the whole thing. So, the themes that this explores, number one, we all know it, it's betrayal. It's fundamental to any spy story, but this time the betrayal is different from some of the other ones. It's not an insider in the intelligence service like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It is not a service betraying their asset, as in Looking Glass Wall. It's an asset betraying their service, an agent betraying their service, a service that they're not that personally involved with, but we are more familiar with by now. So it's a different kind of betrayal, and it's interesting that each of le Carré's books explore a different kind of betrayal. But yes, betrayal is fundamental, and Barley's betrayal raises some serious questions for us, because as with any treacherous decision, the motivations are complex. But for us, they're not necessarily that complex at the end, right? I mean, he does it because he loves this woman in order to protect her and her children that he has met and gone on picnics with and taken care of and loves. So it's not as simple as this man has betrayed his country. And that comes back to the moral ambiguity, the second theme that is at the heart of all of le Carré's books. Interestingly enough, it's not pure cynicism in the way of Looking Glass Wall, you could say it is. There is moral ambiguity. I mean, Barley Blair betrays his country. Ultimately, people don't die necessarily because of his actions. British agents aren't killed, they're merely expelled from the country. But he betrays his country. the moral ambiguity comes in again, why? But the moral ambiguity begins well before that. For example, Katya is passing on the information without necessarily knowing at first what it contains. She doesn't tell Barley who Gotha is. There are these links in the chain: Katya, her children, her friend Igor, who carries messages for her without knowing what the messages are, or most importantly, Nikki Landau. All of these characters are small pieces in a larger machine, but their individual actions all ask pretty key questions about the morality of it all, because they all have moments of crisis. And the moments of crisis are most interesting because they're contrasted. So as I said, the original document is passed through an intermediary, so Katya can't give it directly to Barley because he's not in Russia, and the story begins with Nikki Landau receiving the document. He receives it, realizes it's important and hides it, returns to Britain, gives it to the authorities, accepts payment, and shuts up. And le Carré makes a real point of this in passages, saying how he never spoke, how the narrator, who is one of the service's legal advisors, is so impressed. He owns a video store, never speaks of his patriotic deed again, and the narrator makes a key point of how impressed everyone was with him. And you don't realise why. I mean, when you're reading it, you think, why is this important? Why do we care? It's good that he did that, but why do we care this much? And then when the eventual betrayal of Barley comes, you realise le Carré is setting up these contrasting bits. The ultimate loyalty to their country at the start, and betrayal, but for interesting moral reasons at the very end, and they bookend the book in a very enjoyable way. Now, as I've said, motivations. Motivation is not just love, but also disillusionment, and that's another key theme. Disillusionment with the system at large. So Barley, as I said, the CIA are involved, and midway through the story, there's a big interlude where they take him to this island off the Atlantic. They investigate him, they use polygraphs, the Americans question him intensely, they don't trust him, and Barley basically just gets tired of it. He thinks, I'm giving you people something, and you are questioning me as if I'm crazy. Obviously it's standard procedure, but he doesn't like it. This creates a disillusionment, so Gotha, most importantly, he's the original disillusioned person. He hands over these documents because as a young scientist he feels the Soviet Union is not doing enough. But disillusionment is never complete, and that's what makes it interesting. So Katya, our woman who handed over the documents, eventually knows what's going on, but she continues. Not because she is a raging capitalist or something. She quite clearly states to Barley she doesn't want to leave, and he knows that, and that's why he betrays, because he wants to save her. But she clearly loves her country still, but is still willing to betray it, because she's disillusioned with the system. And the system versus the individual is another key part of this, because Barley feels he's the individual making these decisions against a system, and then eventually against two systems, because he feels the British on one side and the Americans, the Western system, and the Soviets in the Eastern system, Eastern on the other. And ultimately Barley feels he's trapped between the two, even though at first he's employed by the one. And I think all of that sums up to create a very interesting medley of characters, because you have contrasts, Nikki and Barley. You have different motivations, Barley and Gotha. Gotha for disillusionment for his betrayal, and Barley for love. As I said, you have love between Barley and Katya. But you also have comments on the institutions of the day through the narrators. So as I've said, the narrator is a legal advisor called Palfrey. And this whole book is through his eyes. And Palfrey is struggling. He's not disillusioned at all. He's a loyal officer. He signs off on things you wouldn't even consider. But he has his doubts, and it's through his doubts that we see the internal perception of these events. We're seeing betrayal from the perspective of a service that's been betrayed, rather than the other way as we did in other books, like The Looking Glass Wall. All of that to say, I think the characters are more developed, more enjoyable, and the story thus more accessible for anybody than some of his other books, and that's why I think it's my favourite. Now, there are some other interesting notes. So you've got the story, you've got the themes, some interesting background. So, Russia House, actually, as people will know, is quite a common term now. So, in lots of books, like David McCloskey's Seventh Floor, there is a Russia house in a certain place like the CIA, and that would be the place that deals with Russian matters. And that term comes from this book, the title of this book. So it's had such an impact on the world with which it describes that it's created its own term. I think that's so interesting how it's like how people say, I don't know, like politics is downstream of culture. Even intelligence work is downstream of culture, because his cultural significance with this is so much that the book title is now a common phrasing. Some other context. Le Carré, by this time, later writing, is increasingly disillusioned himself with the system that he is a part of, and a lot of that delves into this. So the initial reason that the CIA and the Americans don't like the story is because it doesn't please people in the Pentagon. People in the Pentagon are talking about Reagan, 80s, a thing they call the Star Wars, so lasers and shit, I don't know, basically spending money. And there's a massive part of this where our narrator, where Barley are confused and annoyed by the fact that the Americans don't want this real information because it would go against defense contractors, Pentagon hawks, defense hawks, and you can feel Le Carré's frustration with those people, with essentially neocons in this, and I think that's an interesting insight that plays well later, and that's a good criticism by him. So that's the context and some of the background. Now, last of all, why is it a great story? It's a great story because the people are incredibly relatable, even years on. The systems are different. I mean, these people live so different lives. Even though it's perestroika approaching, and it's approaching the end of the Soviet Union, Barley is a very old school English person. Like, incredibly old school. The institutions are old school, the practices are old school, but the people are relatable and the motivations are relatable, and that's always the most important thing with something that's historical like this. You can still enjoy it. But another reason is you don't know the end. So the end, it comes out, right? Barley is gone, he's missing. But eventually, our narrator meets Barley in sort of a fantasy book moment where he visits him later on, and Barley is very civil about it, and they offer him money to basically cover up any embarrassment because they don't want to admit that he betrayed them because it looks bad. And he basically says, I don't want the money and I don't really care. And I think that's interesting because, one, a lot of defectors did move to the Soviet Union and saw publicity afterwards. Some didn't, so I don't know, Anthony Burgess, Kim Philby, people lived in Moscow and had lives afterwards, and this explores that. But the end is not known. He lives his own life, and he's not sure if Katya is ever going to come visit him. We also don't know if the information both are provided about missile sites was ever true, and the whole thing spins into a war over what was true and what wasn't, and nothing ever really gets done, and you can see his frustration with that. And ultimately we're left with that knowledge of nothing was really achieved, and that Barley is sat there waiting at his house for the woman he saved, not knowing if she's actually going to come, but sure that she will. There's an uncertainty to the story, even at the end, even when you think all the tricks have been played, that makes it an enjoyable read. So, yeah, that is why Russia House is my favourite Le Carré book. That's why it's that. Honestly, 5 out of 5. And definitely recommend. Yeah, that's it. Go read it.